Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. The forest road is narrow and damp. It's early morning in northern France sometime around the year 1305. Mist hangs low between the trees. Hooves press into soft earth. Leather creaks, satchel shifts against a traveler's hip as his horse moves at a careful pace. Not the charming kind of reputation. Not the storybook version with merry men in tights redistributing wealth and singing in the trees. The real kind. The kind where men step out from behind oak trees with knives and short swords and take what they want. And right on cue, two figures emerge from the brush. One grabs the reins of his horse, the other eyes the satchel at his side. "Coin," one demands. The traveler doesn't reach for his coin purse because he isn't carrying one. Instead, he slowly removes a folded document sealed in wax with a red cross. It bears the mark of the Knights Templar. The bandits hesitate. Coin can be stolen, but a promise backed by one of the most powerful institutions in Europe, that's harder defense. The traveler will retrieve his funds in Paris or in Accra or in Jerusalem. The value isn't in the piece of paper. It's in the trust built behind it. But what happens when that trust is attacked? What happens when the king himself turns on the institution behind the seal? And what happens when the man leading that institution is burned alive in Paris on March 18th, 1314? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, March 18th, that story takes us to 1314, when bankers stopped wearing armor. If you've heard of the Knights Templar in the last 20 years, it's probably been through a novel or a movie. Something dealing with hidden treasure and secret rituals and cloaks and codes. The real story is less cinematic, but it's actually more important. The organization known as the Knights Templar were born in Jerusalem around the year 1119. It was in the uneasy years after the First Crusade. Their founders pledged themselves not to wealth, but to protection. Pilgrims traveling from Europe to the Holy Land were being robbed and killed along exposed roads. But it was important to understand that the Knights Templar weren't a group of freelancing mercenaries. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes in France, this order of knights received formal recognition from the Holy Church. They answered directly to the Pope, and that detail matters, because in medieval Europe, papal authority crossed borders in ways that kings couldn't. A Templar house in Paris and one in London were part of the same religious institution. They owed loyalty upward, not locally, and that gave them something rare: jurisdictional freedom. Now, add devotion. Nobles donated land and wealth to the order for spiritual reasons. Supporting a military order defending the Holy Land was seen as an act of piety. Donations could ease conscience, secure prayers, and strengthen one's standing with the church. But there was also something practical. The Templars were disciplined. They kept records. They managed estates efficiently. A noble who entrusted land to the order often saw it administered more reliably than if it had remained scattered among local stewards. Over decades, those estates, along with a lot of wealth, accumulated. By the mid-1200s, Templar properties stretched across France, England, Spain, and parts of what now are known as the Middle East. Their Paris headquarters in the Temple district became a fortified compound, part monastery, part vault. They wore armor, but they were becoming administrators.
Imagine home, The smell of coffee, the sound of a lawnmower, the sun's warmth on your face. Free to be yourself, surrounded by love that helps you grow. This is a place to call home. That's an American dream we all deserve. But in 50% of US states, you could legally be denied housing if you are LGBTQ+. Get the facts and hear real stories at lovehasnolabels.com. Brought to you by Love Has No Labels and the Ad Council.
So now let's imagine that you're in Paris around the year 1290. Markets along the Seine River, merchants shouting prices, silver coin passing from hand to hand. And in the Temple district, thick stones enclosing one of the most secure complexes in the entire kingdom. If you were a pilgrim headed to Jerusalem, you could deposit funds at a Templar house in France. In return, you received documentation, coded, structured, backed by the order's reputation. When you reached Acre or another Templar stronghold in the eastern Mediterranean, you could retrieve your money. Not really modern banking, but value traveling on institutional credibility rather than the physical coin. Even the French monarchy relied on them. Philip IV of France, who ruled starting in 1285, faced constant fiscal pressure from wars with England and Flanders. Royal taxation systems were still developing, and he needed liquidity. The Templars handled portions of the royal finance. They extended credit. Their Paris compound functioned effectively as a treasury repository. Now, think about the power balance in that situation. An international religious order, loyal to the Pope, is managing funds across borders and holding influence within the French financial system. King Philip had already clashed with Pope Boniface VIII over authority and taxation. Sovereignty wasn't theoretical, it was being contested. By the year 1307, the order was led by a man named Jacques de Molay. He was a knight from the Burgundy region of France who had served in the Holy Land and risen through the ranks to become Grand Master. That's the highest level and leader of the order, and that happened in 1292. He wasn't a mystic, he was an administrator and military leader trying to preserve an institution that had already lost Jerusalem and was searching for a renewed purpose. When Philip IV moved on Friday, October 13th, 1307, de Molay was in France and he didn't see it coming.
Retirement can be scary, but only if you're not prepared. That's why AARP created thisispretirement.org. Because unless you've already retired, you're in pretirement, and you still have time to plan. Learn about retirement savings options, potential tax breaks, and how you can build savings over time. Visit thisispretirement.org for free resources to help you customize your action plan and feel the retirement fear disappear. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
I always had to be so good, no one could ignore me. Carve my path with data and drive. But some people only see who I am on paper. The paper ceiling, the limitations from degree screens to stereotypes that are holding back over 70 million stars. Workers skilled through alternative routes, rather than a bachelor's degree. It's time for skills to speak for themselves. Find resources for breaking through barriers at tearthepaperceiling.org. Brought to you by Opportunity at Work and the Ad Council.
For years, Jacques de Molay maintained that the order was innocent. He had negotiated with Pope Clement V. He had attempted to reorganize the Templars after the fall of Acre in 1291. He believed the institution could survive political pressure. Instead, it unraveled pretty slowly. In 1312, the papacy formally dissolved the order. At that time, de Molay was arrested and brought to Paris for charges of heresy and corruption. Over the next 2 years, he and many of his knights were tortured and confessions were extracted. That led to properties and all of the knights' vast wealth being seized and taken by the church. After years of political maneuvering, Pope Clement V formally dissolved the order in 1312, but he and the Church needed to send a signal to the world that the order was officially gone. On March 18, 1314, on a small island in the Seine River, Jacques de Molay was brought out for execution. The crowd gathered and smoke lifted into the Paris sky as the last Grand Master was publicly burned. The message was unmistakable. Royal authority had prevailed. But here's the business lesson. The need for cross-border financial trust did not end that night. Trade still flowed through Italian ports. Merchant families in Florence and Genoa expanded systems of bills of exchange. Banking houses like the Medicis would later formalize secular, non-religious, financial institutions that operated beyond purely religious authority. The Templars were not the first bankers, but they were one of medieval Europe's earliest large-scale transnational trust networks. When Philip dismantled them, he did not eliminate trust as currency, he redistributed it. The evolution of financial institutions away from armored monks and toward merchant houses and eventually modern banks accelerated, making sure that international trust survived. But it all just changed guardians on March 18, 1314, when a man died in Paris. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you're wanting to actually understand business better without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.